Good morning, everybody. I'm Alex Kostakis. I'm one of the steering committee members for the RAIN group. I'll be hosting today and then guiding some of the discussion and Q&A that we do throughout the session. So I'm going to start by thanking everybody who did respond to that survey I sent out a few weeks ago, the very unscientific survey. But I think the key takeaway, which you may have seen in the PDF we sent out, was that over half of the respondents said they were overall very unfamiliar with certain processes related to COMERB and the Office of Research Committee Support. So I think what that says to me is that we do have, we all see ourselves as research administrators in one way or another, but we do very different things. Some of us, our only interaction with these offices is when we need to get a protocol number for a PI and check a box on an NIH application, or we get a just-in-time request that's due in 3 days. Others of us know how to write protocols and submit those regularly. So the goal today isn't going to teach anybody how to write and submit full protocols, but really just kind of give context to what these offices do and how our work interacts with them, whatever your role in research administration is. So with that, I'm going to turn things to John Heldens. John's the director of the Colorado Multiple Institutional Review Board. I'm responsible for protecting human research participants' rights and welfare and to promote ethical research. I hope I got their mission statement correct. John has joined us to talk about his office, how it intersects with our work. After that, we'll do a few structured questions based on the feedback I got through the surveys and the email, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. That should take us to about 10:30, and then we'll switch over to the Office of Research Committee Support. So I'll turn it over to John there.
Hey, thank you, Alex. Nice to meet you, everybody. Some of you see you again. I'm going to share my screen now and pull up my presentation. And we'll get this going. Great. Can everybody see that? Right on. So thanks for the intro. And I just want to say, there's a lot of us involved in research administration, right? Various aspects of it. And a very easy solution for all of us in terms of staying in touch with what we need to know is to know each other. If, like from my office, if I know who to reach out to for a question about a grant proposal, for example, I don't need to know all that information. I just need to know where to go. So hopefully at the end of this will help you know us a little better and get you in touch with answers sooner. Let's see here. There we go. So who are we? My name's John Heldens. I'm the director. I've been here about 4.5 years. Many of you know Kat Sutherland. She's the assistant director, and I think she often steps in with just-in-time submissions. Other people that are good to know for you are our 3 IRB managers, Matthew, Ryan, and Melissa. They all oversee 1 or 2 panels within our office. I've included a link to our full staff listing. So if you go to our webpage, you can find contact information for any of us, including our chairs. And our general email is listed there too. And again, the main message at the beginning, at the end of this presentation is feel free to reach out to us at any time whatsoever about any question. And we're happy to answer those questions. We've organized our office to be able to be responsive to those questions. What general services does an IRB provide at COMERB? Obviously, the IRB review is the central service that we provide, and we do that for our university, for Children's, for UC Health, for the VA, and for Denver Health. And more often, we take on a single IRB role for non-affiliated institutions. AHARP, that is the Association for Accreditation of Human Research Protection Programs. We have to get accredited, reaccredited every 5 years, and we have a central role in that. We hold office hours every Monday from noon to 1. So anybody with a question about research can just pop in. You've probably seen the email reminders. They go out at least weekly about this. They're well attended. We have staff and chairs to answer anybody's questions, and we can answer questions ad hoc at any time. So we are constantly throughout the week meeting with researchers, PRAs, asking various questions about study design, recruitment, quality improvement versus research, what have you. We'll do training such as this for institutions, for our affiliates, for departments, for small research teams, for student groups, one-on-one, whatever the need is, we can step in and provide some training. As I mentioned, we do single IRB review. I think I spoke about that to you about a year ago. We provide our forms and guidance on our webpage. And for you, for grant proposals, on a regular basis, I'm asked to provide a letter of support for single IRB submissions for where they're going to be the prime on a multi-center human subjects grant. We have 10 full board IRB meetings a month. You don't really need to know how the various panels break down, but I provide it here. Panel C is our primary children's IRB, and panel D is our primary oncology IRB. A and B review just about anything. Panel S is a social behavioral IRB, but they don't convene that often. So only about 25 to 30% of research requires full board review. Most is eligible for expedited review or is exempt. That still requires a review by my office. We have a little more than 3,000 active studies sitting with COMERB. There's probably another 500 or so studies where we're relying on an external IRB. Those numbers fluctuate a little bit. Again, roughly a third has to go to full board. And those are primary clinical trials. They're more than minimal risk research, drugs, devices. And they usually take place in one of our hospitals or at the CTRC. For downtown, less than 1% of their research needs to be reviewed by the full board. So panel S, as I mentioned, doesn't convene that often. Roughly 30% of research is eligible for expedited review and 40% is exempt. Exempt and expedited studies undergo a very similar review process in my office, and that is they're reviewed by one IRB member. And that's the bulk of our work. Secondary research is such as chart reviews, going back to the medical record systems, or doing research on a data set or archived tissue samples that already exist at the time the research is proposed. So those studies, about half of them are approved in my office same day or next. If a research is eligible for exemption, that takes us about 2 days, the median turnaround time. Median for expedited review is 20 days. Median for full board review is 28 days. So this is pertinent for those just-in-time submissions. And I like to use median here because if, with the just-in-time situation as an example, what that means is if the study team's ready to go, it's going to be less than this number here every single time, you know. So we review a lot of research that, you know, an investigator submits to us, but there's no funding deadline, so it's not necessarily high priority. And those are, as a group, you know, the studies that end up on the other side of the median. But if the research team is ready to go, we can get those turned around very quickly. So the review process, now this is just in time sort of scenarios. At the time of the proposal, you don't really need anything typically from the IRB. As I mentioned, occasionally, if we have a researcher proposing a multi-center trial or study of some sort, and it's going to trigger a single IRB requirement, I'm often contacted for a letter of support. I'm not always contacted for a letter of support. So I think the requirement sits a little more with individual program project officers and individual institutes that are not exactly consistent across the board. But what I will do is I'll ask the PI for a copy of the proposal. I'll look over the proposal, and if COMERB can serve a single IRB, I have a standard letter of support that I can provide to them for their grant submission. If we can't serve as the single IRB, I will let them know And then they have to plan for either paying a private IRB or perhaps contacting one of the other sites involved to see if they can serve as a single IRB. Typically, you don't need IRB approval prior to just-in-time notification. Some investigators do go ahead and submit something to us. Some investigators intend to conduct the project regardless of that funding. They can get, they might have some funding to get it off the ground, for example. But typically we don't see it until the just-in-time notification. So when a researcher receives that notice, we like to tell them, contact us immediately. They can, at that point, they will have to submit an IRB application to us if they don't already have one in place. But if I'm contacted, what I will ask for is, let me look at the proposal, and I can look that over and tell them, all right, is this going to be exempt? Is it going to be expedited? Is it going to be full board? They would have already indicated to the NIH the level of review, but I need to confirm it. If it's a full board study and it's really complicated, then we can have a discussion with the PI to sort of see if there's a way for us to approve the first part of the study, knowing that the rest of it has to sort of take place sequentially. But we can always get them some sort of approval, but sometimes it takes a little bit of a discussion and gets a little complicated. We do prioritize these just-in-time submissions. When they submit an application to us, you know, it's not uncommon for them to forget to tell us they have a just-in-time award. So put that in a cover letter, let us know, because we can't read minds, but we can be responsive. So let me talk a little bit about what's human subject research and the levels of review. Again, I'm going to go over this really sort of at a high level quickly. If you ever have a question, again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So it's not in human subjects research if there's no intervention with the subject. If the researcher, anybody on the proposal, never had or has access to identifiers, and dates are identifiers, so a date of birth, date of death, date of service in a hospital, for example, that's PHI. Or if the source of the data are publicly available. If you have any questions, again, reach out to us either at our general email. I think many people reach out to Kat and me. We're happy to answer those questions really quickly. So some nuances here. If we had a researcher, for example, that had a funded study and created a data set, they got consent from subjects, they did whatever they need to do on the study, and they created a data set and they shared those data with NIH. And those data, NIH makes those data available for other researchers. Another researcher comes along to want to get a funded proposal to use those data that NIH now has, and lists one of the researchers on the original proposal. NIH will consider that researcher to have had and continue to have access to identifiers. So we can't say they don't have access to identifiers. And if we need to discuss that further, because that gets a little nuanced, we can do that at the end. Levels of review. So in general, if research presents more than minimal risk, it has to go to full board review. Minimal risk is a quirky little definition, and it's reference to risks of daily life. So just a few days ago, I had a researcher come to COMERB. They wanted to insert a Swan-Ganz catheter into the jugular, into a patient undergoing anesthesia. Surgery is taking place anyway, anesthesia is taking place anyway. It's a procedure they do all the time, and the researcher says, well, this is minimal risk, I do it all the time. And I would agree, they're experienced, they're experts, risks are low, but we have to go back to the daily life definition. And I can't, you don't walk down the street and someone runs up and puts a catheter in your neck. So that has to go to full board. The other piece is that for expedited review, there are explicit defined categories of research which are eligible for expedited review. So it has to be minimal risk and it has to meet one of the categories. I'm not going to go through the categories today, but I have a link in the presentation. Once again, questions, please reach out to us. If it's minimal risk and it doesn't fit into one of those categories, operationally, what that means is we have to send it to full board once. And if the full board agrees that it's minimal risk, we can expedite it from that point forward. Exempt research, same framework. There's just a different set of very specific categories that under which research may qualify as exempt. Exempt, again, I just want to emphasize expedited review, exempt research still needs to be reviewed by COMERB. We just have a single person do it in the office and we give it the appropriate approval. Let me jump to a frequent misconception we have about single IRBs. If a researcher wants COMERB to serve as a single IRB, you contact us. If a researcher wants to rely on an external IRB, you contact Deb Barnard's group. And their email address for this particular question is externalirb@ucdenver.edu. And then you had some other questions. One, and I'll just start going through these and then we'll open it up for discussion. There was a question about when to budget for IRB costs. COMERB is funded by indirects, so you can't have a direct cost for additional COMERB review right now. In the single IRB context, what a researcher can do is identify that there are going to be additional costs because of the single IRB review, and you can address those by hiring additional study coordinators to help with a single IRB. So if you're doing a study and there are 5 sites, COMERB, and we're the prime, COMERB will serve a single IRB, assuming unless it's something risky or too complex and we can't get involved. But our PI is going to have to manage the communications between COMERB and those 4 other sites. There might be 5 different consent forms that get used instead of 1 on that study, for example. So there are additional costs. I would like to say you can budget for extra COMERB costs, but the way we're financially structured, we can't do that. But you can get extra coordinators on your research team to help with the extra work. There was a question about how to get IRB documents, an approval letter, any details about the IRB, our review. And the answer to that is contact us. Again, we are happy to help you find that information. Even if you have access to InfoEd, if you don't use it on a regular basis, if you're looking for a specific document, it's a little complicated to find it, and we're happy to help you. There's a question about subaward requirements. So if we're the prime versus if we're the sub. If we're the prime and there are other sites engaged in NIH-funded research, then that's going to trigger a single IRB review requirement. So those sites may have to rely on us. Occasionally, we can find ways to make an exception, but these days, almost all the time, we have to get an IRB reliance in place. Conversely, if we're the subrecipient, we can rely on the other sites almost all the time. And again, that's Deb Barnard's group at externalirb@ucdenver.edu. There was a question about continuing review requirements. So I think many of you are aware when the new common rule went into effect in beginning of 2019, January 2019, the requirement for continuing review for expedited research went away, and we've taken full advantage of that. So there are a small number of expedited studies that do require continuing review for various reasons. Either they're very complex, there's something about them that we just want to keep tabs on. Or in the single IRB context, if it's a single IRB situation, we do require continuing review just to make sure that the additional sites are being managed appropriately. Other than that, it's only full board studies that require continuing review nowadays. And then there was a question about the HSR portal, and I'll address that sort of generally, and then if somebody has specific questions, we can get into that too. For the research that you're dealing with, that is, I believe, the proposals coming in from the university, either downtown or at Anschutz, everything has to go through the portal. There are some exceptions for unfunded exempt research, for example, but I don't think that's on the table for today. What the portal does is it's a central collection point so that central administration can review the research and determine if other sorts of reviews or activities are required, such as biosafety, radiation safety, such as having to build a calendar in ENCORE, or just putting the study into ENCORE, such as having to do a Medicare coverage analysis. In the context of an NIH-funded study, there's not going to be a requirement for additional scientific review. So the portal will also trigger SARC review. That's a scientific review committee, but it's not necessary if NIH is already doing scientific review. And the portal also notifies automatically our partners, Children's, UC Health, Denver Health. So it's a way for research administration to be aware of and act upon as quickly as possible any research submissions coming in. In the case of just in time, you do need to go through the portal. There's no reason you can't reach out to COMERB, the PI, and have a quick consult on what we're going to need to get you a just-in-time approval. The HSR portal should turn that around really quickly. They're good at that, and if you identify that it's a just-in-time submission, that should get it to us right away. But we can be flexible and start our review in parallel in that context. I think that gets me to the end of my slides. We have a few minutes for questions. Sorry if that went a little long, but I think I covered some of the questions Alex provided to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You covered most of what I had. If anybody does have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or type them into the box and I can ask them. One thing that came up, John, when you and I were talking last week was that just in the importance of marking those boxes correctly on an NIH application. You mentioned that one thing that can happen is if it's not marked correctly, or you do mark it as human subjects research, but it turns out not to be, that can get you on a path that's really hard to get off of. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that might provide some context for those of us who are submitting a lot of applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the more common problems we have, I think I skipped over a slide, so I'm going to pull that up real quickly here. Just a minute. One of the more common problems we have is that a researcher will check the box for human subjects research on a grant submission when we look at it later and we realize this isn't human subjects research. And as to this date in my career, I've never been able to get a study off the human subjects track after that point. So it's usually in the context of a researcher who's using some biospecimens or some de-identified data. And they've marked the human subjects box, and then we have to do a review. Where if I had to go back to the beginning, I would have said, no, it's not human subjects research. So the definition is a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction with an individual or identifiable private information. The caveat being, in this case, HIPAA. HIPAA covers protected health information from deceased patients for 50 years. And COMERB is both the IRB and the privacy board for the university and our affiliates. So if you're looking at data from deceased individuals, what that means technically is we don't have to do an IRB review, but we probably have to do a HIPAA waiver. So that still means you have to submit something to COMERB. But if the researcher's looking at an existing data set or an existing library of biosamples, and the researchers on a proposal never had access to identifiers and don't have access to identifiers, that's not human subjects research. And then they're not removing these samples for research. They're existing, they're on the shelf at the time the proposal goes in. And they weren't involved in the original collection of the data or the samples, then that's not human subjects research. That's the most common misconception I think that we run into. And it's certainly not the end of the world. If we have to do an IRB review, it's usually just the one because we don't have to do continuing review. Consequences of saying something's not human subjects when it actually is. Hypothetically, that could interrupt your funding proposal, so best to get it right. However, in my experience, NIH is usually all over that. And so if they identify something as human subjects research and the researcher has said it isn't, they will correct that fairly quickly and in short order. I recently had an example where we granted, we have a mechanism that's, we call it 118 because that's the, well, nowadays it's 119. It's a regulatory definition for research that isn't specific, doesn't really, they can't get into the specifics for us just yet. And we can use that fairly broadly in a just-in-time situation. Every once in a while, an institute will say, that's fine, we can fund you, but this really doesn't count. And you need to get your IRB approval in place within 60 days. Again, we can easily respond to that. So I think the main risk is interrupting your ability to obtain the funding.
Great. So we have two questions that if you can touch on quickly in the next minute or two, and then we'll switch over. So first, have there been any changes due to COVID-19 to the COMERB process? Assume there have been, so what changes? And then will there ever be an option to charge more COMERB reviews as direct cost?
The only thing that COVID has done, we prioritize the COVID research. So there really wasn't any formal change in our process. We were able to sort of pivot and just give a little higher priority to those studies. Frankly, I think my office, your office, everybody at this institution has responded amazingly the last 12 months. So nothing, I can't think of anything that really got interrupted or delayed, except actual conduct of the research. So the ability to charge for COMERB review, I kind of doubt it. I don't think that's going to change. It would take a pretty major effort to redefine how we fund COMERB and research administration and take it out of indirects. The consequence of that is we would have to become a direct cost for every submission. So I don't think it would save anybody work actually at the end of the day. So I don't expect that to change.
Great. We did have a few questions. I'm going to save those and perhaps send them on to John, but yeah, we can send slides out after the meeting. So thanks again, John, for your time.
Absolutely.
And at this point, gonna pivot and welcome a few people from the Office of Research Committee Support. So Office of Research Committee Support oversees everything related to Institutional Biosafety Committee, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, Radiation Safety Committees, and several other things that I know nothing about. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Laura Richardson, the administrator for the Office of Research Committee Support, Jamie Skeeters, Aya Cook, Committee Coordinator, Jill Garvey, the IBC Committee Coordinator, and Mark Dowse, Director of the Office of Research Committee Support, are all here to provide an overview of their work and answer any questions you may have.
Hello, thank you. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. Oops. All right. So I'm Laura Richardson, and I recognize a lot of names from speed type changes. So it's nice to see all these familiar names. And I hope you can remember me too. So we are the Office of Research Committee Support, or the ORCS, as Mark has named us. And we cover everything touching animals with biomedical research on campus, and the Denver campus as well, and Denver Health. And we also cover anything radiation safety included into the animal work, or biosafety included in the animal work as well. The committees are required by law, federal and state, other laws, largely of volunteers. I think everyone except for the vets are volunteers. Their vets are the only ones that can't get out of it. We meet regularly or ad hoc as needed. If we need to meet really, really quick, we can do expedited reviews. We need to make up all the regulatory guidelines. Our members need to meet those. We just had our ALAC inspection last week, and we should get full accreditation for that, but that's definitely one of the things that they look at. You need to have an approved protocol by our committee before you start any of the work. The goals of the study need to be clearly stated, and you really can't change the goals through amendments. All of the subsequent amendments need to fall under those original project goals. That's how we know it's an amendment and not a whole new protocol. And justification for everything, of course. There we go. The IACUC, we work to protect the animals on campus, and any use of live animals needs to be approved by the IACUC committee first. The IBC committee coordinator is Jill Garvey. And Jill, do you want to just introduce yourself quick and go over what your committee covers?
Sure. The IBC, I'm Jill Garvey, I'm the IBC coordinator. You can get in touch with me just at ibc@cu.anschutz. I handle all that email as well. The Institutional Biosafety Committee covers a wide scope of work on campus, both NIH required and institutionally required research. So you will see requirements for IBC review for protocols that may just be human subject, non-human subject research, use of human samples, kind of touching on what John was talking about earlier. But if they're just taking de-identified samples, the institution still requires that we cover that. For NIH requirements, anybody that uses recombinant products such as vectors or plasmids or anything like that, anyone using transgenic animals. And then we also have purview over infectious agents, biohazards, or certain biologically active toxins such as select agents, which are their own class of products. We also have other random things that we get assigned purview over as well. So you can always just email me and I will let you know yes or no if IBC purview is required. We also have minimal, not minimal, we also have purview over certain clinical trials. These relate directly to human gene transfer or live vaccine recombinant products. So that would be if you have an investigator's brochure that comes in that references vectors or transfection or vaccine that's, for example, the mRNA vaccines that we've been hearing so much about recently, those go through IBC review as well. So there's some bases touched all over campus with those products.
Thanks, Jill. So we do watch out for IBC agents that are included in IACUC protocols and also for radioactive agents. And we talk to each other and just say, hey, Jill, does this person have an IBC protocol and is such and such approved on it? And then she'll say yes or no, and we can move accordingly from there. The radiation safety committees are also covered under our office. Denise Davis is in charge of those committees, and she's reachable at that number and that email address. We do meet on a regular basis with the committees or an ad hoc basis for the radiation safety or the ones that don't need to meet as often. And we do just ask you to contact us or send people to us if they have any questions. We handle such a wide range of people and their projects. Sometimes we get brand new people that don't even know what model they want to work with. And sometimes we get people from another institution that have everything all laid out, that know exactly what they're doing and just have minor questions about things. So it's all different, and they all have different needs, and we kind of tailor our help to their needs. Grant congruency checks are handled by our office, and we compare, the people on the grant and the protocol, make sure everything is covered on it. We look for the strains of animals, the numbers of animals, of course, the same species, and we will ask PIs to clarify or to even amend their protocols if it's not congruent. Basically everything else I've always gone over. Yeah, well, just any questions that anyone has about our regulations or getting a protocol through, please send them to us. For budgeting, one thing I'd like to highlight, and if you could highlight to the PIs as well, is to make sure and budget for occupational health expenses. That's been something that has been just a little bit of a stumbling block with getting everything approved. We want to make sure everybody's cleared with Occ Health. And that's sometimes something that we didn't think of that at the beginning. So make sure they budget for that. And then on the OLAR intranet site, which you will need access to, but you can contact the OLAR admin for access. They have per diem information, billing information, and all of that stuff for budgeting for the animal facilities. And we can also answer questions about that. If you email me, I can pretty much get you in touch with anybody that can answer your question as far as research over here. So here's our website. And I think you guys are going to get a copy of the slides and everything, but everything's on there. We have submission instructions, we have helpful tips, we have all of our policies posted. And then here is us. Mark is here. Jamie is here as well. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself? Jamie, our IACUC coordinator.
Good morning, folks. I am the IACUC coordinator, so I'm in receipt of the new and de novo protocols as they're submitted, and I work one-on-one with the PIs and the lab members if necessary to make sure that those all those needs are met as we work towards the approval of those protocols.
Thanks, Jamie. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself? And did I miss anything? Are you still here? I can't even.
Still here. I'm Mark Dowse. I'm the director of the ORCS, and that means I'm the head ORC. So that is by intent. They allowed me to name it. Silly vice chancellor, but I went straight for the acronym. But just to emphasize what Laura already said, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us or send your PIs to us. Even if it's not, even if it's not related to some of the committees that we cover, we often know where to go. So we're a good first stop for a lot of new PIs, especially. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then, yeah, are there any questions, or did I cover everything?
I think you covered a lot, but I can certainly run through a few questions that came in through our survey and things that I'm just curious about. Well, first I'll start with questions that are coming in through chat. So is there a way to get administrative access to the OLAR intranet to assist PIs on changing speed types on protocols?
Yes, absolutely. Daniel Munoz is in charge of that with OLAR.
So one question that, well, if we could go back to the budgeting for occupational health costs, since that's something that seems to be skipped in the budgeting process a lot, perhaps PIs aren't familiar with what those would actually include, or grants administrators aren't familiar with that. So if you could just explain a little bit about what those costs would actually be and what amounts you typically would like to see built in. I assume the problem is that it's not in a budget and then they start to go through this process and realize we didn't set aside money for that.
Right. And I think, Mark, do you know the going rate currently? It depends, because sometimes they just look at your vaccination history and it's really quick. And
Yeah,
sometimes
and-
they need to draw blood for Q fever titers or rabies titers even. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so occupational health is under environmental health and safety. I'm not familiar right now with their current rates, but as Laura said, it really does depend on the exposure. You know, if it's just something straightforward, yeah, they can just check your records and you're done. So it's a range. And I guess my best advice would be to contact OcHealth directly, and you know, state what the PI and or the protocol associates or lab members are going to be exposed to, and then they can do an assessment right then.
One thing that came up when we talked earlier this week was that, you know, if there is a protocol needed or it's marked as vertebrate animal research and the JIT comes in, we usually don't get enough lead time from NIH for you to go through the necessary steps. So what is your advice on, you know, when a PI should start submitting that if they think funding is likely, or should they be waiting until they get that request?
I think as soon as they know, as soon as possible. Wouldn't you say, Mark? As soon as they think it's on the horizon. We can do grant congruency pretty quickly. I would say a couple business days if we're not all on vacation.
That's for the grant congruency. Getting IACUC or IBC approval is often the slower part, because we have to get the committee together and the necessary people to review it and re-review it. So I guess my advice would be, as soon as it looks promising, start talking with us, start getting the paperwork together, and start submitting it. And just in time has always been a challenge for us anyways. And I'm sure.
I think it is for everybody, yeah.
Sure. So when you say grant congruency, is that there is a protocol, but the current grant isn't listed on it, so you need to check, or could you explain what that is?
Comparing the grant to the protocol to make sure that everything included in the grant is in the protocol.
Okay. And in that case, if it is included, at that point, they are able to say, yes, this is covered. Here's the number. Here's the date.
Yes, we give a congruency letter for that.
Yeah.
That goes to the NIH.
Okay, great. So could you go through, I want to make sure I'm not missing questions here, but another thing that came up was considerations when you maybe have multiple sites and you're not doing any laboratory animal research here, but you have a subaward that does. Where does the responsibility fall to have that protocol, and what is our responsibility for reporting that or just confirming internally that that's in place before they start?
If the animal work is being done anywhere at Denver Health, downtown, or Anschutz, we need to know about it for sure. That falls under our IACUC. But if their award just includes animal work that's being done on a different campus, if they're ALAC accredited, then they're fine to have that work covered under their protocol for us. As far as the granting, I'm not sure with the funding how that would work. Mark, do you know?
Yeah, and just what Laura said, if it's not on our campuses, then it's their responsibility, and all we need is, you know, evidence or something that they have ALAC accreditation and that the protocol's been approved on the other institution. We have also an interinstitutional agreement form that we use to verify those things. And so if that comes up and it's a subaward, just let us know and we can send the, you know, our colleagues at the other institution just this one-page form, and all they need to do is fill it out and sign.
I know another thing we mentioned was that Department of Defense grants can have a very extensive review process. We need to do something and they need to do something. So if you want to talk about what that looks like and what our advice for investigators can be during the application stage and what they should consider when they talk about their animal plan and what their expectations should be, should they get a notice of likely funding from DoD.
It is very extensive. I think a lot of those grant congruency checks are done by them. Is that right, Mark? That they usually do them because they're
Yes.
picky. A lot of our PIs that have, and please correct me, Mark, if I'm wrong, but a lot of the PIs that we have with DoD grants have lots of separate IACUC protocols. We do limit IBC protocols, institution biosafety protocols, to 1 per PI because that's way easier. But IACUC protocols, the DoD can be very picky and they can want 1 protocol per grant. So you may want to warn them that if they have multiple DoD grants, like, wow, you're amazing, but you may need a lot of IACUC protocols to go with each one. And it can be a little bit iffy because we don't want to overlap work necessarily, but with 1 protocol per grant, you get into that dicey, the gray areas where, well, it's the same project, same people, same investigator. Isn't the work covered on 2 different protocols going to be similar? So we do have to watch for that for sure. But Mark, what else? What did I miss?
Yeah, DoD is great funding, but the bureaucracy is pretty amazing as well. And I'm sure many of you have dealt with them. We do recommend 1 IACUC protocol per 1 DoD grant. NIH, this is not an issue. We can just check the congruency, and so long as it's covered in the protocol, we're good. But DoD does their own grant protocol congruency, and they can be picky, as Laura said. A couple of other things, and partially this is just, contact us and we can help. They often ask some specific questions about the animal use, and some of it has to be responded to by the PI because it's research based, and some of it can be us. They often ask for a pain or distress category as a good example. And for rodent work, the IACUC does not provide that, but if they do request that, just let us know and we can provide that from the office.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the group for either? I think John is still here. So if you have either COMERB or ORCS questions, get those in. John, if you are still on, one that came up is the COMERB office hour happening in person now or still through Zoom? And if it's through Zoom, where can they get that link?
It is through Zoom, and that link is on our webpage. You can go to, we have an office hours page, so you can always register there. It's at Mondays from 12 to 1. You're welcome to pop in if you have any questions. And our office sends out a weekly reminder about that. And I think the School of Medicine, as they often do, echoes that same message and gets it out to campus as well.
Thanks. Okay. Well, if we do not have any questions, then I'll give everybody back some time today. I want to again thank everybody who joined to speak about their offices. I know this is helpful for me just to provide context. I won't be submitting any protocols anytime soon, but I do feel better prepared to advise PIs on what they need to be thinking about at different steps in the process. So thanks, everyone. And if you get questions that pop up 10 minutes from now, just send them my way. I'll filter them to the right person, or you have all of their information now. And hopefully after seeing their faces, you're comfortable reaching out to them. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good day,
you.
everybody.